Now on the top of Daf Pei Beis, Omid Beis. Ano Amri, the Amri, Kirab Yossi. Now, what does this mean? Ano the Amri Kirab Yossi. It was Rabbi Yochanan, if you recall, who said that if you have a Kohen who's an androgynous, he's machil, even chazav v'shok, which means that his wife, who's a bas Yisrael, could eat chazav v'shok. And who is the Tana that holds that an androgynous could be machil, even chazav v'shok, which we say is doraisa, because it has to be. It's during the Zman HaMikdash. And it's Rabbi Yossi. He's the Tana, as we said back on Daf Pei Aleph, who is the author of our Mishnah, that androgynous is machil b'truma. He holds that truma b'zman hazeh is doraisa. And therefore, there's an equation between truma and chazav v'shok. And Rabbi Yossi is saying that even though both are doraisa, nevertheless, the Kohen could be machil, both in the case of truma and in the case of chazav v'shok. The Rabbanan, on the other hand, rejected Rabbi Yossi, and they hold that truma b'zman hazeh is the Rabbanan. So therefore, Rabbi Yochanan himself holds that truma b'zman hazeh is doraisa, and that was the equation of Rabbi Yossi between chazav v'shok and truma. But the Brisa itself reflects the shita of the Rabbanan. They hold that truma b'zman hazeh is the Rabbanan, and therefore in the din Rabbanan, Rabbi Yochanan understood that 50-50 is a suffix Rabbanan l'kula. We don't need a rov. But if you ask Rabbi Yochanan what he would say, for sure you'd need a rov. No question about it, because Rabbi Yochanan holds, like Rabbi Yossi, that truma b'zman hazeh is doraisa. And by the way, I think we paskin that truma b'zman hazeh is Rabbanan, but not because kedusha shniya kitchel shayta v'lo kitchel asidlov. No, we hold kedusha shniya kitchel shayta v'kitchel asidlov. But there are other conditions that have to be met with regard to truma in order to make it doraisa. Like, for example, you might need rov yoshvel lel. I mean, you have to know what the conditions are. Now the Gemara wants to bring a proof that Rabbi Yossi is very consistent in his shita that truma b'zman hazeh is doraisa, and we're going to bring it from Seder Olam. Seder Olam is a brisa which was authored by Rabbi Yossi bar Chalafta. That's our Rabbi Yossi here. So if you want to read about this, there's a whole discussion here about the history of the brisa called Seder Olam. Now, there is a sheet of Tosfos on the top here of Pei Beis Amid Beis that actually Rabbi Yochanan himself holds like the Rabbanan, that truma b'zman hazeh says the Rabbanan. And his girsa is Ana Amina li Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yochanan himself never accepted Rabbi Yossi, but he's telling us that according to Rabbi Yossi, there would be truma b'zman hazeh doraisa, therefore you would require a rov. But he himself, Rabbi Yochanan, holds that truma b'zman hazeh is the Rabbanan, and you would not need rov. The Sanya, now we're going to prove that Rabbi Yossi holds that truma b'zman hazeh is doraisa. Be Seder, or in a brisa which is called Seder Olam. And we're darshaning the pasuk. Asher Yarshu Avosecha. This is Dvarim Perek Lamed. V'yirishta. Now, what does it say? Asher Yarshu V'yirishta. That's a double language. It's redundant. And the answer is that Yerusha Rishona Ushniya Yesh Lahem. The Torah repeats the word Yerusha to indicate that there'll be two Yerushos. Twice the people of Israel will take over the land of Israel. The first is Yoshua, and the second is Ezra. And in both cases, there'll be a kiddush of Eretz Yisrael. In the time of Yoshua, the first time that the people of Israel entered into the land, and then later on in the time of Ezra, they had to go back and again reestablish their settlement in the land of Israel. And the Kiddush here was not a result of Yoshua, but rather a brand new Kiddush at the time of Ezra, because once they went into Golus, the original Kiddusha that was engendered by Yoshua is Betela. Ushlishis Ein Lahem. What that means is that at the time of the second Churban of the Romans, of Titus, and the Jewish people were sent into Golus, the land of Israel did not lose its Kedusha, because Kedusha Shnia, Kidshel Ashait v'Kidshel Asid Lava. So that Kiddush at the hands of Ezra was a Kiddush li Olam Vayed. And therefore, when we'll come back to the people of Israel on the third round, despite the exile, the longest exile, we don't have to be Yoresh and Makadesh the land again, because Lo Batlo Kedushas Aretz. And now we conclude that, according to Rabbi Yossi, as quoted by the Spricer, Truvim Bizman Hazeh is de Oraisa, because the second Kiddush, even though we were sent into Golus at the time of the Churban Bayesheni at the hands of Titus, nevertheless, Lo Batlo Kedushas Aretz. And if the Kedushas Aretz is still intact, then Truma is the Oraisa. The Rambam has a whole discussion about why the Kiddush of Ezra was Liolam Void, and it wasn't butter with Churban and Golus, whereas the Kiddush of Yoshua was a temporary Kiddush that was batel when the land was conquered by the Bavli. My Rebbe Rav Soloveitchik has a lot of Torah on that. V'yom Rabbi Yochanan Tanot Seder Olam Rabbi Yossi, who is the author of the Bryce of Seder Olam, it's Rabbi Yossi. So you see, Rabbi Yossi holds it. Truvim says Doraisa, and therefore Rabbi Yochanan says that when Rabbi Yossi and our Mishnah says Androginus is Machil Truma, and we're dealing with Truma Doraisa, Bisman is according to Rabbi Yossi, then we have to conclude that Rabbi Yossi holds that an androgynous is a zachar gomer. There's no suffix at all. He is an absolute zachar. Therefore, he's machil truma to his wife and truma doraisa. And again, he can be machil chaz of a shok for the same token. Reish Lakish, on the other hand, holds that according to Rabbi Yossi, Truvim's man says to Rabbanon, and he's going to answer the Rabbi Yossi actually quoted the Brisa, as we saw in Seder Olam, but he didn't hold like the Brisa. Okay, now once the Gemara gave the answer that according to Rabbi Yochanan, we don't need rov in the case of Shtei Kupo, so we could rely on Tliya and apply that principle, because we're going according to the Rabbanon who hold the true mitzvah and says the Rabbanon. So the Gemara asks the following verse, Sava Rabbi Yochanan, is it really true that when we deal with a nefila of truma into chulin and so forth and so on, we don't need rov? All we need is mechza al mechza, and we apply the principle of something to Rabbanon Lakula with regard to truma bisman as said Rabbanon, but nan mikveh sheyesh bar boim sa mechuvanos, you have exactly precisely 40 sa of Megishamim that make up this mikvah. There's no yitaron. There's nothing above and beyond the shir. Nasan sa'ah, and now a person came along and he poured a sa'ah, which would jack up the liquid here in the mikvah to 41 sa'ah. But what was that extra sa'ah that he added? It was mei peros. And mei peros, we have a principle, poslim es ha-mikvah. Now, in this particular case, he already has 40 saw of Megishamin. He doesn't need a 41st saw. So even though that extra saw is mei peros, that's not going to passel the mikvah when it falls into the 40 saw, because it's batel in the mikvah. Now, v'natal saw. Now he takes a saw out of the mikvah, so he's left with exactly 40 saw. Kosher. Now, this is really a radical chiddush. What do you mean kosher? He took out a saw. He's left with 40 saw. And even though it's true that most of that saw is megishamin, but nevertheless, he took out a full saw. So if he took out a full saw so in other words, that saw that he's taking out is not made up of 100% made payrolls. He's not like he's getting rid of the made payrolls. Obviously he's taking out making shaman. And if he's taking out making shaman, then he only has 39 saw and point whatever of making shaman. But he certainly doesn't have 40 making shaman. Why is this mikvah kshera? It has to be that the saw of made payros, when it falls into the mikvah 40 saw, it's the tailor. And now we can say that the made payros is mitzaref to make up the shear. So now we have a shear of 41 megishamin, as if to say, because of bittul. And now if you take out one saw, you're still left with 40 saw of megishamin. Therefore, the mikvah is a mikvah kshera. But there's a limit. The Omer of Yehuda bar Shilo, Omer of Asi, Omer of Yochanan, ad rubo. My love did ishtaya rubo. So let's understand the Havamina of the Gemara now. We're learning the first understanding of Rabbi Yochanan. When can they rely on bittul? Says Rabbi Yochanan, only if, let's say, he does netila and he takes out water from the mikvah up to 19 times. So therefore, even if each time that he took out a saw from the mikvah, he took out a full saw of megishamin, but nevertheless, he's still left with 21 saw of megishamin. And the mikvah is kosher because it has rov megishamin. So the key number here is 21, because 21 is the majority of 40. So if he only took out 19 sayin, he's left with 21 sayin. And this would prove that you can apply rov in a din d'Rabbanan. Now, exactly why this is a din d'Rabbanan is a machlokes rishonim. Because according to Rashi and Tosfos, we're talking in the Mishnah about a case of mei peros, apostles of mikveh midoraisa. So why are we dealing with the d'Rabbanan here? So the answer is, as Tosfos explains in Nosan, that midoraisa, the mei peros are betelim, and there's a principle here called rishon batel. So if we're going to passel this mikvah, we can only passel it midrabbanan. Again, other rishonim are talking about not mei peros, but what's called mayim she'uvim, which is passel midrabbanan. In any event, the bottom line is that this mikvah is kosher, according to Rabbi Yochanan, based on rov, because you have 21 sign of megishamin. And you have to know that for sure, that you have to certify and be certain, in all certainty, that you have in the mikvah 21 sign of megishamin. So you see, we need rov, even though we're dealing with a d'Rabbanan. So in any event, we prove from this statement of Rabbi Yochanan that we require rov even in a din d'Rabbanan. And that's why he was not matir taking out 20 sa'in. because you'll only be left with 20 son and Shamim, and you don't have a rov, you have Mechzal Mechz. What's going on over here? On the one hand, we said that Rabbi Yochanan, in the case of Shtei Kupos of Tliya, says that since we're going according to the Shita Rabbanon, that Truma B'tzman says Rabbanon, therefore 50-50 is enough to activate the principle of Safik Rabbanon L'Kula. We don't need a rov. And the reason for that is, again, because Truma B'tzman says there are abundance. So under abundance, we don't need rov. All we need is 50-50. But here in the case of the mikvah, Rabbi Yochanan is insisting that you must have 21 se'in out of the 40 that's making shaman. And even though the psul here is only drabanan for various reasons, nevertheless, he still requires rov. The Gemara rejects and says low. Rabbi Yochanan didn't mean ad rubo. So we're analyzing those two words of Rabbi Yochanan, ad rubo. He didn't mean that you need a rov of making shaman that's left in the mikvah. But rather, what he meant was the lo nishkal rubo. You can't take out 21 se'in from the mikvah, because then you'll be left with a mikvah of 19 se'in of Megid Shaman, which is a mute. And the mute will become butter in the Megid Shaman, in the Mei Peros that are psul. But rather, he would allow you to take up to 20 se'in out of the mikvah. And when you're left with 20 sin out of the mikvah, and 20 sin are left in the mikvah, I should say, therefore, you don't have rov megishamim, you have mechzal mechza, and that's enough in a case of a drabanan. So again, we can't really prove from this mission of mikvah that Rabbi Yochanan holds you need rov with regard to dinim drabanan, because we don't know exactly what he meant by ad ruba. Ibai Sema, the Gemara gives another answer. In Din and Drabanan, even Rabbi Yochanan agrees that you need rov. And in the mikvah, Rabbi Yochanan, when he said ad rubo, he meant to say that he has to make sure that there's a rov megisham in the mikvah. And he cannot take out of the mikvah more than 19 saw. The price of Shtei Kupos, there Rabbi Yochanan says that you don't need rov. And presumably because since Truma B'tzman says Rabbanan, according to Rabbanan, therefore we can apply the principle of Tliya in a 50-50 suffix, and we don't need rov. Shani hacha de ikal memer shani omer. Okay, now this is a very lumdachasuk. This one line here, de ikal shani hacha de ikal memer shani omer. And it's not for a daf yomi shir, that I can promise. But I'm going to try to do the best I can with the limited tools that I have. Okay. We have a right to assume, according to the halach of Tliya, that's called Ani Omer, that the chulin fell into chulin. Why? Because if the chulin fell into chulin, then there's no Iser at all. And that gives me the right to forego or forfeit rov. I don't need a rov. I couldn't care less if the volume of chulin in one kupa is exactly the same as the volume of truma in the other kupa. All I need is tliya. At the end of the day, all I need to know is that the chulin fell into the chulin. What difference does it make what the kamus, what the volume is of the chulin and the truma? It's irrelevant. If I would assume that the chulin fell into the chulin, there's no iser at all. But in mikvah, where immediately when you pour in the meperos, which are posthumous on mikvah, into the mayim of the mikvah, there's no way of saying clear. What are you going to say? That when he takes out the saw, the natil of the saw was the saw that fell in, namely the meperos? What are the statistical probabilities or possibilities that happened? And after he poured in a saw of meperos and he took out a saw, he took out exactly the same saw of meperos that fell in. I mean, the water immediately mixes together. So therefore, we have no right to apply the principle of Tliya. You're going to need Rov. And we're going to assume that in general, you need Rov, even for a Din D'Rabbanan. So basically, what we're saying is the following: that Tliya and Taroves are two different dinim. In Taroves, even in an Isa D'Rabbanan, Rabbi Yochanan agrees you need Rov. So when Truma falls into Chulin, we're going to need Rov. Rov Chulin to be Mavatel a mir of Truma, even if Truma Bismana says D'Rabbanan. And that's why Rabbi Yochanan, in the case of Mepiros, is going to only allow you to take out 19 son. You're going to have a Rov Megisham, even if the psul of Mepiros in this context is D'Rabbanan. But Tliya, otherwise known as Shani Omer, is a whole different story. That's not a Tarovis. We're not going to weigh the volume of Truma against the volume of Chulin. We're going to assume that since Truma is D'Rabbanan, then the Truma fell into the Truma and the Chulin into the Chulin. We're not applying the dinim of Taroves and Bittul and Rov. Forget about all that. Because if the Chulin fell into the Chulin, there's no leftover of Truma in this mixture at all. There's no Truma in it. So you're not talking about Bittul where you need Rov. Okay, now the Gemara goes back to the original machlok between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish about androgynous. Rabbi Yochanan holds that androgynous is machil, his wife, even chaz of shot. Why? Because androgynous is a zachar gomel. Reish Lakish holds that an androgynous is a suffix. We don't know if he's male or if she's female, and therefore ain't a machil el b'truma d'Rabbanan. On Truma D'Rabbanan, we could be somech on the zachus, but on Truma D'Oraisa, we would be oser, and there's no machil. So the Gemara asks, but Tanan, it says in that Mishnah, androgynous no say, meaning he's allowed to marry a woman, a female. How could you allow him to marry a female if he's a female, right, or a suffix female? It must be that he's a zachar, and therefore he can marry a woman, and his nesuin is a nesuin gemurin. That would certainly support Rabbi Yochanan. It's against Reish Lakish, who holds that he's not a zachar gomer, it's a suffix. And the Gemara answers to me, we're going to have to rewrite the Mishnah in Nasa, if he married a woman, his nesuin are treated as nesuin. She can't get married to anyone else without a get because he's a suffix zachar. And even Reish Lakish agrees that we have to be machmer all of kiz zachar, mitzad suffix. So when I ask for her, no say Tani, it says androgyninus no say. It means he's allowed l'chatchila to get married. It's mutter. And that would only make sense if he's a Vade Zachar. Because if it's only a suffix, we can't allow it l'chatchila. So the Gemara says, wait a second. You think that the language of no say has to mean l'chatchila, then let's look at the next part of the Mishnah. The next statement in this context is my avolo nisa, that he shouldn't be married to a man, to a male. And that sounds like it's only a din l'chatchila. So why does it say lo nisa? It should have said eno nisa. Right? It's not meaningful at all. I'll read to you the translation. He says, "Madu omer sam bishna behem chech androginus eno nisa shemashmusuhi shemilchatchila mikra din eno nisa halo poshedu sheim rashoy lisa lechatchila rei nechshav kizocher gomer the ein tzarich lomar sheinu nisa." He's interpreting as if it's as if the Gemara is asking a pshita, my kamashma. Elamai nisa dieved. That means the Mishnah wants to tell you that even b'dieved is nesuin is not nesuin. So therefore, Reish Lakish says that I can interpret androgynous no say nami dieved, that even if he got married, that if he already got married and he created facts on the ground, then his nesuin is nesuin. But we're not using a lashon lechatchila, just like in the case of Havalo Nisa, it's not a lashon lechatchila. So Gemara rejects this. Amri lo. The Mishnah is not talking about only of a diavad situation, but no say lechatchila machma, like Rabbi Yochanan, he's a zocher gamur, and he's allowed to marry a woman lechatchila. Now we have a difficulty with Reish Lakish. But avalo nisa, and when the Mishnah says in the Sefer lo nisa, it doesn't mean eno nisa lechatchila, but if nisa nisuin nisuav nisuin, and we're talking about a male, right? A male androgynous with a male, but rather what the Mishnah means is b'diavad nami lo. But agav the Reisha, the Mishnah uses even in the Sefer the lashon of lechatchila. But really, the thing is that his nesuin, even b'diavad, is not meaningful at all because he's a vadei zachar. Now the Gemara asks a kasha on Rabbi Yochanan. If androgynous is a zachar gomer, midatani Sefer, it says Rabbi Eliezer androgynous chayv l'eskila kizachar. Right, for an act of homosexuality is michlal de tana kama. That means Rabbi Yossi, who says no say avalo nisa, argues against Rabbi Eliezer, and Rabbi Eliezer is machmir, and he says yechayev skila. Tanakama holds sipugei mesaftale. We don't know if he's a zocher gamur, and therefore he could be chayev skila in case of a male, or it's only a suffix zocher, and we cannot be mechayev him skila. So we see now that Reish Lakish is correct that in Rabbi Yossi's sheet, androgynous is a suffix zachar. So that's what we mean when we say michlal de tanakama sifuke misafka. That means Rabbi Yossi, who says no say avalo nisa, and he disagrees with Rabbi Eliezer, who says that it's a chiv skila. He holds it's a suffix. So this is a kasha on Rabbi Yochanan, who says that androgynous is a zocher gomer. Gemara says no, and this we knew yesterday already, but that's because we anticipated this Gemara. Bein lamar mishpat shitole. Everybody agrees, whether it's Rabbi Eliezer or Rabbi Yossi, that he's a zocher gomer, and that's the shita Rabbi Yochanan. And even the Tanakh would agree that if he's ba'al zachrus, he's chayav skila. Meaning, if he had a homosexual intercourse with a male, then he's chayav skila. And there was never a debate about that, because even the Tanakh holds that he's a vadei zachar. What is then the machlokes and afkavia between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yossi, the Tanakama? If he has a sexual intercourse with a male, but not through his male organ, but through his female organ. It's not only if he has a bia of a homosexual nature, but even has a bia which would normally be a heterosexual bia. Nevertheless, he's chayav skila. Marso Rabbi Eliezer holds kizachar. It's only if he has a bia derech zachrus, but through his nakfus, he's parted from skila. He has a note here. He says, "Afshe bia benakvuso kemaisa bia shel nekeva." Right? He's explaining now the Tanakhama that even though you'll say, well, he's now having what would normally be a sexual act, a heterosexual act. Mikomakom, kevan shedino shalandrogeninus kizachar chayoven al bia kazu benakvuso. The ain kol chilu ketzad bia nasas. And the Gemara later on Daf Pei Gimel and Beis, is going to go into detail to explain this machlokas. Now, the next part of the Gemara is about halacha. Do we paskin like Rabbi Yossi and our Mishnah that Joginus is a zachar gamur, or do we not paskin like? And again, there's Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish machlokas in Rabbi Yossi that according to Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yossi holds that Joginus is zachar gamur. He's machil even though right. So Reish Lakish holds eno machil b'truma d'Rabbana. But now we want to know, who do we paskin like? Omar Rav, and here we turn to that Pei Gimel, is Lesel Amastisa Mekami Brisa. Now a mission in which Rabbi Yossi says his din that Jogeninus is a Zachar Gomer, he's Machal Ishto B'Truma, and Rabbi Yochanan says even B'Truma Doraisa, that is rejected because of the Brisa, which records that Rabbi Yossi rescinded his original opinion, and he holds that androgynous is not a zocher, he's a suffix. The Sanya Rabbi Yossi Omer, androgynous, birya b'fnei atzmahi, below chriya bo chachamim im zocher mnekeva. So you see that Rabbi Yossi in this price was choser bo from his position in the Mishnah, and he holds that the status of an androgynous is that of a suffix, not like we saw in the Mishnah. And the Gemara is going to ask, why does Rav say that the Mishnah is rejected because of a brisa? Adarabba, lesel a brisa becoming masnisin. We should really accept Rabbi Yossi's opinion as formulated in the Mishnah rather than Rabbi Yossi in the brisa. Mishnah is more reliable than a brisa. The Gemara answers, "Mida shavke Rabbi Yossi lebar zuge shmamina hadarbe." Since Rabbi Yossi in the brisa drops Rab Shimon, right? In the Mishnah, it's a ben zug that two of them together. So Rab Yossi and Rab Shimon. In the Brisa, it doesn't mention Rab Shimon at all. So therefore, we're going to assume that that Hadarbe, that Rab Yossi in the Brisa changed his mind. He holds now that androgynous is a suffix. And if he changes his mind, then we're going to paskin that androgynous is a suffix, not like in the Mishnah Vada. Ushmuel Amar lesel abraisa makame masnis. And so that's where we'll pick it up in Ritz Hashem tomorrow. Okay, have a great day.